Ever wondered why that third scoop of ice cream isn't as delightful as the first one? Welcome to the fascinating world of economics, where we unravel the mysteries of our everyday experiences. This brings us to the concept of the law of diminishing marginal utility. It's a concept that might sound complicated, but it's actually quite simple. Imagine you're on a hot summer day and you have your first scoop of ice cream. It tastes heavenly, right? Now, as you proceed to the second scoop, it's still delicious, but maybe not quite as thrilling as the first one. By the third scoop, the delight starts to fade. This is what economists call the law of diminishing marginal utility. It suggests that as a person consumes more and more units of a particular commodity, the satisfaction or utility derived from each additional unit tends to decrease. So, in essence, the law of diminishing marginal utility explains why we don't keep getting the same joy out of consuming more and more of the same thing. But hold on, this law makes a few assumptions. Let's delve into them. The law of diminishing marginal utility thrives on a set of assumptions. First off, the law assumes that consumers behave rationally. That is, they aim to maximize their satisfaction or utility. In simple terms, it means we all want the biggest bang for our buck. The second assumption is a constant unit of consumption. This means that the commodity or service being consumed is homogeneous, or the same throughout. Think of it like eating slices of the same delicious pizza. Each slice is just as cheesy and delightful as the one before. The final assumption is that there's no change in tastes and preferences. This means that our preference for that cheesy slice of pizza remains constant throughout the consumption process. These assumptions help us understand the law better, but they also point to some of its limitations. Now let's turn these words into a picture. Imagine a graph. Picture a Cartesian plane where the x-axis represents the quantity consumed of a good or service, and the y-axis represents the utility derived. Now let's plot some points. As the consumption of the good or service increases, so does the utility. But here's the catch. The increase in utility does not match up with the increase in consumption. Rather, it's less. This is what we call diminishing marginal utility. Picture a curve on this graph. This curve represents the law of diminishing marginal utility. It starts high up on the y-axis and slopes downward as you move to the right along the x-axis. The downward slope of this curve indicates the diminishing utility derived from each additional unit consumed. But what does this mean? Simply put, the more you consume of a good or service, the less additional satisfaction you'll get. Imagine you're eating chocolate. The first piece might be heavenly, the second piece still good, but by the time you're on your fifth or sixth piece, you're likely to be enjoying it less. This decreasing enjoyment or utility is visually represented by our downward sloping curve. It's a graphical representation of a fundamental concept in economics, one that impacts consumer behavior and market dynamics. So remember, the more you consume, the only less additional satisfaction you'll get, and our graph visually represents this concept. Like any theory, the law of diminishing marginal utility has its critics. One of the main points of contention lies in the quantification of utility. Critics argue that utility, being a subjective measure of satisfaction, is intrinsically difficult to quantify. The satisfaction derived from consuming a good or service varies from person to person, making it challenging to assign a universal numerical value. Additionally, the law of diminishing marginal utility assumes constancy in tastes and preferences. Critics highlight that this is an oversimplification. In reality, our tastes and preferences are dynamic, evolving with time and influenced by a variety of factors such as new trends, social context, and personal experiences. Another significant criticism stems from the assumption of rationality. The law presumes that consumers always make rational choices to maximize their satisfaction. However, critics point out that human beings often behave irrationally. Emotions, impulsiveness, and other psychological factors can lead to decisions that do not necessarily follow the pattern of diminishing marginal utility. But it's important to remember that no theory is perfect. While these criticisms hold weight, they do not negate the value of the law of diminishing marginal utility. This law offers a simplified model for understanding consumer behavior and decision-making processes. Despite these criticisms, the law of diminishing marginal utility remains a fundamental concept in economics, helping us understand why we make the choices we do.